So, back in 1972, right after a war that literally redrew the map of South Asia, two leaders meet up in the mountain town of Simla. Their whole goal, to try and hammer out a real, lasting peace between India and Pakistan. And what came out of it was the Simla Agreement, a document that, on paper, promised a brand new start. But here's the big question we're looking at today. Did it actually deliver on that promise? And this is the scene. You're looking at the two key players, India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and Pakistan's President Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And you just can't overstate how high the stakes were here. You had one nation that was clearly victorious and the other not just defeated, but literally broken in two. They were there to put an end to all the conflicts, but as we're going to see, the very agreement they signed ended up creating a whole new set of problems that are still echoing today.
Okay, but to really get what's going on at Simla, we have to rewind the clock. We have to go back to the very beginning. Because the rivalry between India and Pakistan, it's not just about land or battles. It's way deeper than that. It's rooted in two completely different ideas of what a country should even be. And this is where you see that fundamental clash laid bare right from the start. On one side, you had the Indian National Congress, and they envisioned this single, unified, secular India for everybody, regardless of religion. But on the other side, you had the Muslim League, making the case that Muslims were a totally distinct nation, culturally, politically, and that they needed their own separate state. I mean, these aren't just slightly different political ideas, they're complete opposites. So these competing visions got baked right into the DNA of the two new countries. India set itself up as a secular democracy, a state that was officially neutral on religion. Pakistan, though, was founded on a totally different principle. It was explicitly created as a homeland for the Muslims of the subcontinent, making Islam a central part of its national identity. And that one difference has shaped pretty much everything about them ever since. All of this ideological baggage created what a lot of analysts call the mirror image problem. And it's this really dangerous psychological trap. Think about it. Both India and Pakistan have always tended to see themselves as the good guys, peaceful, reasonable. And they see the other side as the aggressor, full of evil intentions. This kind of deep-seated distrust just feeds on itself, creating this never-ending cycle of conflict where every move one side makes for defense is seen by the other as a direct threat. Which brings us right back to 1972. This long-simmering rivalry had just exploded into its most decisive war yet, and the entire balance of power in the region was just shattered. That was the very intense stage set for the Simla summit. I mean, just look at the scorecard after the war. It was absolutely brutal for Pakistan. It hadn't just lost a war, it had lost its entire eastern half, which was now the independent nation of Bangladesh. On top of that, India was holding more than 90,000 Pakistani prisoners of war and was occupying thousands of square miles of its territory in the west. India was holding all the cards. So picture this. The two leaders walk into the room in Simla and they have completely different shopping lists. India, led by Indira Gandhi, really wanted to use its leverage to make Pakistan accept the new reality on the ground, that India was now the top dog in the region, and hopefully finally settle the Kashmir issue for good. But Pakistan's Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, he was playing a much, much weaker hand. His main priorities were just to get his soldiers and his land back, and crucially, he had to frame whatever deal he got as a peace with honor. Otherwise, he'd be toast politically back home. And that right there is the key. Even though India had won a massive military victory, it couldn't just crush Pakistan at the negotiating table. A completely humiliated Pakistan could become an even bigger, more unstable problem down the road. So the final deal was actually structured in a way that let Bhutto go home and sell it as a diplomatic win, not a humiliating surrender. But, as we'll see, that spirit of compromise came with a pretty big hidden cost. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the very thing that allowed the agreement to get signed in the first place, this very carefully crafted kind of ambiguous language, well, that also became its fatal flaw. Basically, both sides walked away from Simla thinking the agreement said exactly what they wanted it to say. The biggest point of confusion? It all boiled down to how you read one little word: bilateralism. The agreement said all their problems would be solved through bilateral negotiations. Now, for India, this was huge. They read that as meaning that issues like Kashmir would never be brought up at the UN or anywhere else ever again. It was just between them now. But Pakistan, they had a totally different take. For them, yeah, talking one-on-one was the first step. But if that didn't work,
You bet, they still had the right to go to the UN or get other countries involved. They were reading the exact same text and seeing two completely different realities. And this wasn't just some academic debate, right? This disagreement had real, immediate consequences. The agreement said both sides had to pull their troops back within 30 days. Well, that deadline came and went. Why? Because they got completely stuck trying to draw the new line of control in Kashmir. So India then said, hey, we're not pulling our troops out of the rest of Pakistan until we finalize this line, which Pakistan argued was a totally new condition. It took another 3.5 months of really tense talks just to get one of the most basic parts of the deal done.
You know, drawing lines on a map is one thing, and that was hard enough. But the real, truly intractable problem, that was the massive human crisis the war had left behind. This wasn't just about soldiers anymore. This was about huge populations of people who were completely stuck. First up, the prisoners of war. And the number is just staggering. Over 91,000 Pakistani soldiers and civilians who had been captured in what was now Bangladesh were being held in camps all over India. For Pakistan, a country already defeated and demoralized, getting these men home was priority number one. No question. But they weren't the only ones. At the exact same time, you had more than 120,000 Bengalis, people who were now citizens of the brand new country of Bangladesh, who were stranded in West Pakistan. They were basically trapped in a foreign country and were desperate to get back to their new home.
And then, to make things even more complicated, you had a third group, the Biharis. These were a non-Bengali minority living in Bangladesh, and many of them had sided with Pakistan during the war. Now, they were facing persecution, stateless in the only home they'd ever known. Hundreds of thousands of them were hoping Pakistan would take them in, but Pakistan was really reluctant to do that. So you had three massive overlapping humanitarian crises. And the Simla Agreement, it was almost silent on how to fix this mess. So what you got was this insane three-way diplomatic deadlock. It went like this. Bangladesh, who wasn't even at Simla, wanted to try 1950 top Pakistani officers for war crimes. Pakistan's response? We won't even recognize you as a country until you drop that threat. And India just threw its hands up, saying, look, we can't release any prisoners without Bangladesh's permission because we had a joint command. The result? Complete gridlock. For almost 2 years, the lives of hundreds of thousands of people just hung in the balance.
So how did this finally get untangled? Well, it was a long, slow, grinding process. It took another whole agreement, the Delhi Accord, in 1973, just to set up a basic framework for this three-way exchange of people. The real breakthrough didn't even happen until 1974, when Pakistan finally, formally recognized Bangladesh. That was the move that unlocked everything. And the last of the POWs finally got to go home, nearly 2 full years after the Simla summit was supposed to have solved everything.
So, after all of that, all the arguments, the delays, the human drama, what are we left with? What did the Simla Agreement actually achieve in the long run? What's its real legacy?
Well, you can really look at it as a glass half full or half empty situation. On the one hand, it was a success. It absolutely de-escalated the crisis right after the war and got the troops pulled back. It created the line of control in Kashmir, which, like it or not, has been the reality on the ground ever since. And it did manage to make the Kashmir issue mostly a two-country problem, which is what India wanted. But on the really big stuff, it failed. It was like putting a fresh coat of paint over deep cracks in a foundation. It did nothing to build real trust. And those core ideological conflicts, that mirror image problem, they were left completely untouched.
So, in the end, this Simla Agreement didn't really create peace. What it created was a new kind of status quo, a more stable, managed standoff. It put a lid on the conflict, but it never got close to actually resolving it. And that leaves us with this really fundamental question. Can a standoff, no matter how long it lasts or how stable it seems, ever truly be called peace? The legacy of Simla suggests the answer is a whole lot more complicated than we might want to believe.